Evening with a Legend is a series of presentations exclusive to legends of the famous 24 Hours of Le Mans, giving us an opportunity to bring a piece of Le Mans to you. By sharing stories and highlights of the big event, you get a chance to become part of the legend of Le Mans with guests from different eras of over 100 years of racing.
In 1978, Jim Busby debuted at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in a Porsche 935 from Kramer Racing and finished in sixth position overall. His enduring association with BFGoodrich began with the 1982 Le Mans 24 Hours when his Porsche 924 Carrera GTR won the GT class using BFG's road specification tires, and they remained his sponsors and tire suppliers during his 1984 return to Le Mans with a Group C2 Lola Mazda. In subsequent seasons, he concentrated on managing the team, and perhaps his finest victory came in the 1989 Daytona 24 Hours when John Andretti, Bob Wallach, and Derek Bell shared the win in the Miller High Life Porsche 962. Jim sold his team in 1990 and moved on to other projects and racing. Busby himself may not admit it, but he's regarded as one of the world's best Porsche specialists for the 1970s and 80s. Jim now spends his time in Newport Beach, California with his wife. This Evening with a Legend was hosted by David Spitzer, a member of the ACO USA, and who you might recognize as one of the pit reporters from the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Welcome to everybody, and an exciting night. And this has been quite a series that David has helped put together already with multiple esteemed guests tonight. We're very honored to have Jim Busby. I've spoken to Jim several times now, and I know that tonight my job is probably the easiest job in all of motorsports. All I need to do is kind of get him started. Jim, you've got such wonderful stories, and I'm looking on the backdrop right now on my screen is David Lowe and some of the artwork that was done by Eric Furr of different cars. You've been involved in so many amazing cars over the years, so many memories for me growing up around Watkins Glen and going to sports car races every year. And so I'm sure I speak for all the fans that are on the line to say thank you for your time. And let's start you off with a question just to kind of get you rolling. Tell us about the first time going to Le Mans. Tell us a little bit about how it felt as you got ready to go over there and then arriving there for the first time. It's such an experience. A lot of our ACO members are dreaming or are going to Le Mans. And so tell us about your first time and a little bit about how all that felt.
To sort of give a little background to how that happened, I always dreamed of Le Mans. And Le Mans to me was a kid's dream because my uncle was fascinated by sports car racing and in particular the Mille Miglia and Le Mans. He had a Cat Allard, which he raced at Pebble Beach down south at Torrey Pines. Well, I didn't really have an opportunity to do that. I was a hot rod guy, because I could afford to do that. I worked at a body shop in Pasadena, but I always dreamt of going to Le Mans. And then I started sports car racing, had some success in IMSA right away. I'd raced in Europe before that, which I think gave me a leg up on a lot of guys, and began winning races in IMSA right out of the gate. Well, I built a 935 conversion of a 934 for a fellow, Hal Shaw, who he owned the Orr House. And Hal said, "Hey, Jim, would you drive at Daytona with me?" And I said, "Well, sure, but we don't have a factory 935 engine. We're going to run your 934 engine, but we rebodied the car as we did for Rick when he first went to Sebring. And it was a mid-packer, and with some luck, it could run near the front." So after my second stint, I got out of the car and I was walking across the paddock at Daytona, and up walks Erwin Kramer. And I'd met him through John Fitzpatrick and a couple of guys. And of course, their focus was Le Mans, Monza, and the big stuff. And he walked right up to me and he said, "Jim, would you like to drive our car at Le Mans?" "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Kim, do I leave tonight? Do you want me to not?" And he said, "We've watched you. We want you to drive our cars at Le Mans." And I said, "Well, okay, but I'm going to level with you. I race really hard and I want a chance to win. Le Mans is a very dangerous race. And part of the mystique of Le Mans, whether we like it or not, is the fact that it's very high speed and very dangerous. And that myth and that truth have carried Le Mans as far as it's gotten today, and it remains high speed and dangerous today." Somebody said, "Well, they put in the chicanes." Well, we raced non-chicane. Rick Knoop and I did that. We get it. It's still a high speed, dangerous dangerous place, and that's half of the mystique of the race, and it needs to stay that way.
Mhm.
People need to understand that this is the real deal. This is not your little backyard game.
Yep.
And that's what people are so fascinated with. So I said, well, who would I drive with? And they shall remain nameless. And they told me. And I said, look, I'm so flattered that you've asked me to come, and I would like very much to do that. But I want a chance to win. And I don't think that's going to happen. And he said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, what if we could find a couple of guys in America that I think are really good that can give us a chance? And we're racing in the Group 5 category, which is harder than the IMSA category, but different size fuel tank, different length pit stops. It's a tough race to win. And so I thought about that, and I walked over to Fred Knoop, Rick's dad. And I said, Fred, do you think Rick would like to go to Le Mans? Of course, Rick had never been to anything like that. He was at Daytona in I think a RSR Carrera with maybe Howard Meister or somebody like that. Good team. And I'd seen him race. And the best part was he was quick enough as a beginner, but he brought him back alive. The cars came back alive. And if you think you can win at Le Mans without bringing them back alive, you're dead wrong. It's not going to happen.
Especially in that era, you know. I mean, nowadays maybe a little bit more tolerant, but certainly in that area, the danger and the keep the gearbox going, you know, keep the darn thing on the track.
Absolutely. Fred looked at me and he said, well, if we could put that together, that would be wonderful. I said, we've got to replace the money that these other drivers are bringing with money that we can find, because that's going to supply it. And frankly, I'm a paid driver, and we got to find some money to run our guys. And so he said, what about Chris Cord? And I said, Chris Cord's really quick. I've raced him in both Trans Am and in IMSA and his Mons, and he's very quick. Chris Cord was that guy that you didn't expect him to be, and then you looked in your mirror and there he is, stuck up your tailpipe. So you got to press on a little bit. So I thought Chris is a real winner. He's mature, he's quick, he's good. So I called the Kramer brothers and said, what about these guys if we can round up some money? Well, Chris found Amdahl Computers, which if you look at the film about Le Mans that was done, narrated by Bruce Meyer of the Peterson Museum, you'll see that we were sponsored by Amdahl Computers. We weren't buy-a-ride guys. We got the sponsorship. So I called the Kramer brothers and I said, we got it. We've got 20 grand from Amdahl Computers. Chris Cord's the driver. They say, wow, he's great. We love him. And we've got Rick Knoop. It went silent on the other end of the line. And then Erwin or Manfred Kramer, their English was a little questionable and probably designed to be so because they don't want to be too committal. But anyway, here was the question. Has Rick Knoop ever driven a turbo? My answer was, has Rick Knoop ever driven a turbo? Like it was the most incredulous thing I've ever heard in my life.
Preposterous question, yeah.
And they never ever said, well, what do you mean by that? They said, okay. So we get there. And one of my first memories when we got to Le Mans, we had some car trouble with some vibrations. We sent Rick out for a couple of laps. After he did the Mulsanne flat chat in high gear, man, he had eyes the size of sauce when he arrived back in the pit lane. I said, they're going to try something. They put something over the air inlets to try to stop this vibration. Put me back in the car and I took off again. It didn't fix it and so on and so forth. Then we'd put Rick in. And then Le Mans, the practice is really great because it starts at 4 p.m. and then it morphs into darkness. But darkness is very late there.
10:30, something like that, depending.
You run a little bit in the day and you run a lot at night, and it's wonderful. And so Rick took well to that. And after that, it was just no problem. He was like an old pro, and he was a kid at the time. Poor Chris recently passed away, but he was a vet at the time, a veteran at the time. And I was not a veteran of Le Mans, that's for sure, but I'd done some long distance racing.
Was it everything you thought it was going to be in terms of
It was more. And I think the nighttime racing on the Mulsanne Straight, and Rick will back this up, was the most incredible thing I've ever done. And it was more difficult than I ever imagined. I'd run Daytona, gosh, I can't even tell you how many times, the 24-hour, and been on the podium and finished second, third, fourth, second, so on. Never won that one myself as a driver, but we did win as a team. But it was everything that I imagined and then some, much more dangerous, much more risky, and it was everything that I had hoped it would be. Remember that when people see what Le Mans was in the day and they saw Steve McQueen's movie and the huge accidents, That's the real deal. Those cars do flip over backwards. They do hit things at very high speeds. And while the terrible 1955 Mercedes accident will always be tagged to Le Mans, Le Mans will always own that accident, people still show it. Why? Because it's part of the scenery at Le Mans, and it's huge, and it had an enormous impact on the popularity of racing, tragically in both directions. And why? Do people go to Le Mans to see the danger and people lose their lives? No. They go to see them escape doing that. They want to see that they're right on the ragged edge of being in that awful fire, but not in it, almost. And that's what they want to see. And as soon as there's too much, I don't want to say safety, but too much emphasis on not making it risky, it loses its mystique. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. And it will always be the race. It's not a race. It's not a great distance race. It's the race. Always will be. And you can win the Formula One World Championship, but boy, when you get done with that, you better get a ride at Le Mans. You notice they're all doing that because that's the one they left out, and it's still the most exciting, the most dangerous, and the biggest thrill to win. It's incredible. And the helicopter's going over the top of the pit lane with your name on it. That doesn't happen at IMSA at Mid-Ohio, but it's a hell of a hard race at Mid-Ohio. But the reality is that it has a mystique in and of itself. It's not the same as anything else. Daytona 24 Hours is a wonderful 24-hour race, but it's not Le Mans. It never will be. And it's still just as tough to win in some ways. It will never have the mystique and the thrill that not only the drivers get, but the spectators get. The spectators are on their toes all the time. You know, in the middle of the night, you walk out into the pit lane and you stare across. And when the race started, there was 150,000 people in that grandstand.
Standing on those concrete little steps that are at a weird angle. Yep.
And then you come out at 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night.
And they're half full.
Yeah. And then you come out at 3 a.m. and they're empty. There's not a single person in the grandstands. What do? Well, whatever French people go off into the forest and do, and then come back and they start trickling in. And by morning time, there isn't an empty seat anywhere. I had a really fun experience in my first daylight session after we'd run all night. And Chris had witnessed a horrible accident on the Mulsanne Strait, and we thought it had killed Bob Gerritsen. But I thought it was Brian Redmond because I'd been following Brian, and then I lost track of him. I think I got around him or something. Anyway, we weren't together anymore. And then I came around and I saw this wadded up red 935 in the middle of the straight, and they were cleaning it up after Chris had witnessed the accident. It was turbos and engines flying through the air and everything jumped. The Kramer brothers had the foresight to say, don't pit for new tires. We were running over debris. Chris called in and said, you want me to come in and get new tires? This is a really bad accident. It's going to take a while to clean up. They said, no, don't come in. Why? Because you'll put new tires on the car and go out and puncture them. And then we'll put another set on. Plus you don't pit. Because when I asked Phil Hill, when he came in right before the start, after my first session, before the start of the second session, which would have been Chris, I said, Phil, give me an idea how you win this thing. And all he said was, after his decades of racing there and 5 wins or whatever his overall win record was, he looked at me and he said, stay out of the pits. That's all he said. Great wisdom and tale. And all he said was stay out of the pits. And we stayed out of the pits. As Rick will recall, we ended up also winning not just the Group 5 category. We won what's called the Francis Afrique Trophy. You ask, what is that? Well, I don't know, to tell you the truth. They give you so many trophies. I'll take that too. And we've got them all lined up here.
When was the last time you got over to Le Mans? Have you been over recently?
No, I went to race and never went back for any other reason. I went 3 times and we won 3 times.
Tell us a little bit about the lodging and the experience, just the whole ambiance, seeing people at dinner and the whole experience of being in France. Was that extra special beyond the racetrack?
It was equally important because I'd never done it. And I went with Chris and his wife, Rick, his brother, and Rick's dad. And we got a little, I'm going to murder this town, but I think it was called Alençon.
Your pronunciation is excellent. It's on the signs right around Le Mans. That's right. Yep.
So Rick's dad rounds up this hotel in Alençon and a cool little restaurant. So that's good enough for me. And we're staying there and we commute back and forth daily. So here we are sitting in this tiny little town that's not known for racing. It's known for making beautiful lace and a very sophisticated population. And I'm really thinking this is cool. And yet we're a few miles away from the circuit, which is remarkable in itself. But mostly when I get there, I find out that the technical inspection is in downtown Le Mans.
Yep.
So then somebody says to me, who's going to drive the car to the racetrack? From the tech inspection. I said, I'll do it. I'm your guy. And then somebody says, no, they quit that last year or something. So they don't do that anymore. But they did in the day. And I imagine myself going down some boulevard in this fire-breathing 935 headed for the racetrack and down the Mulsanne Highway, which then leads you into Indianapolis Corner and all incredible, legendary stuff that's going to happen to me as a young man. None of it happened. They trailered the car over there and we got going, and that was that.
But it was right by the Place de Jacobin with the big, beautiful Gothic church and everything right there in the center of town.
Absolutely, yeah. Every tech inspection I ever went through, all you can think of is, when am I going to get out of here? Do I really need to be here? Please look at my helmet and tell me it's okay and let me get out of here.
Right.
You could have stayed there for 2 days and enjoyed the ambiance and the photograph. The fans were so excited to be there, and they're locals. You'd think that if you lived in Le Mans, you would ignore the race after a while. It would become blasé. I grew up in Pasadena, and I eventually ignored the Rose Parade, which was 2 blocks from my house, park cars and make money. No, if you live in Le Mans, you go to tech inspection. The entire city turns up for that. And so you get to meet people that are thoroughly excited to be there and want to meet you and so on and so forth. So once again, the experience of Le Mans, it isn't just the challenge or the danger. It's Le Mans itself. It's an unusual city full of wonderful people. And the idea that French people can be difficult to get along with is something that's generated here, I'm sure, because they weren't. And they were wonderful to us and treated us like princes and princesses the entire time we were there. My wife and I went a couple of years later. There's another movie that was done by BFGoodrich for the Porsche clubs, which you can also find next to the Le Mans movie.
Let's talk about BFG. So you mentioned that you started out on street tires and then you kind of put together a deal that allowed you to take them to Le Mans. Is that right? Can you talk us through a little bit of that journey?
Well, really what happened is it was sort of the reverse of that. What happened was a friend of mine from sports car racing back in the day when I was racing in Europe, and I'd won a race at Le Châtre in central France, which had been won by Jack Brabham and some big shots. The only reason I won is I was a kid from America and I didn't come in the rain. I didn't know about rain tires because I'd never raced in the rain in my life. So I just stayed out, slid through the grass, and they finally called off the race with a couple of laps to go because it was too dangerous. And I won it because everybody else stopped for rain tires and I stayed out. So I'd gotten a reputation for being this crazy American guy, which wasn't intentional. It didn't occur to me that I'd want to stop, and I didn't. I had gotten to know Jochen Neerpasch, who at the time was running the FIA and had run BMW when I drove for BMW factory. He hired me. I sadly replaced Ronnie Peterson at BMW after he died, and Jochen Neerpasch was my boss. He came up to me at a race in America and he said, you know, we're happy with what you're doing here in America, but do you think BFGoodrich would be interested in ever going to Le Mans? And I said, well, I don't know if they would, but I sure would. He said, well, we're going to start the C2 category, which is going to be very competitive. Do you think they'd be interested in participating in that? So I went to Gary Pace, who was running in the BFGoodrich program at the time. And I said, Gary, I know you've mentioned that you like the idea of Le Mans. And we'd already been in the 924, which was basically a factory effort of a Brumos car. And we had done it on street tires, which was outrageous. But BFGoodrich had had some experience at doing that by shaving their tires down almost to slicks. So they're pretty sketchy in the beginning and they never get to be a race tire, but they get manageable. And we did it in the 924 Turbo, which was a factory effort, which has a whole bunch of fun Le Mans stories about Porsche rebuilding the engine in the rain and so on and so forth. And we win. So when Neerpasch suggests that we go again on street tires, BFGoodrich goes for it. I go to Japan and meet with the people from Mazda because they're going to supply the engines, and we know that they're good 24-hour engines. And I take a look at their stuff, and I said to one of the engineers, I said, well, maybe you'd want to have a Hewland transmission, not a synchromesh transmission. Maybe you want to have a little different chassis than what you've been running there for a couple of years. You haven't had the success that you like. If you send me to Lola, we can get a really good chassis built, use your running gear and so on and so forth, and a Hewland gearbox, and we'll be good to go. So the guy looks at me, and the greatest honor in Japan is when you're getting ready to go to Le Mans, you get to take a bath with the president of the company. So naturally, I'm thinking, well, maybe that's not my first idea. I guess I'll do that. So that night, I talked the president of Toyo Kogo, which is Mazda in Hiroshima. I talked him into going to Le Mans with a Lola chassis, a Hewland gearbox, and their power plants with BF Goodrich tires, which BF Goodrich is convinced are going to be street tires. I'm not, but that's a fight for another day. What ends up happening is I fly backwards that night around the world to London, meet with Eric Broadley, who I'd driven for in the sports car championship in Europe.
Of Lola fame.
Could you build us a car that would do something unique and win at Le Mans? He said, sure. That's for Nearpash's new C2. I said, it is. He said, okay. And they had their Le Mans car there, which was a 610. I looked at it and I said, well, that's a big car for a small engine in the C2. And he said, well, why don't we make it smaller? Isn't your sponsor a tire company? And I said, of course it is. He said, good. We need 13-inch tires, just like on the front of a Formula One car, and we'll squeeze that body down to nothing.
And that was that really flat body that looked like it got squashed.
That's exactly right. And it came out really pretty, and I've got pictures of it all around here. Rick and I, our first race in Europe was Monza. Rick and I won it.
In that C2 car.
In the C2 car. And then we went to Le Mans and won there.
Wow.
And the reason was that car wouldn't accelerate like a rocket, but it had high speed because it had no wind resistance. If you look at the pictures of the actual Le Mans car, as opposed to the one we ran here, the wing is down behind the car. It's a trimming device. It's not a real wing, and there's no wind resistance. So by doing that, and then ultimately through tire testing, convincing BF Goodrich that they need to make slick tires with real radial street construction, which was more challenging than you can imagine, because I can remember the first test I did, it shook the fillings out of my teeth.
Oh, wow.
Because they were trying to use a street construction that has all sorts of the lifelong tendencies of a street tire, but with the traction of a racing tire. But they did it, and we won. I mean, we didn't screw around with that car. We led races and we won.
Wow.
To win at Monza, on our way to
That's high speed also, right?
there was only one thing that they liked better than looking at our cars, and that was looking at our 18-wheeler. They'd never seen one. There was 100,000 people watching the race, and 40,000 of them, every time we'd pull in our 18-wheeler, would come and stand around the truck and wait for it to be unloaded. That was the whole story of the race, was the BF Goodrich 18-wheel truck. And they loved it. And that thing got stuck in some old lady's house, went around a corner and got wedged into a wall. And the president of BF Goodrich had to romance her, write a check for a man to come and remove her fence, get our 18-wheeler out of this little town and put the fence back up and write a check for the whole thing.
Any of our fans that have been to Le Mans or been to France know exactly what he's talking about. You get to these old medieval towns and you're lucky it wasn't two buildings that just couldn't be taken down. But I did a lot of work for Cadillac back in the day. And I mean, we get over there with a Cadillac streetcar and there were places you just couldn't go. I'm imagining with an 18-wheeler. Now, one of our fans asked a very interesting question. The question related to the 1986 event. Apparently there's a rumor out there in the world that you were racing with BF Goodrich sponsorship on a car that actually did not have BF Goodrich tires. Is there any truth to that? You're smiling already.
First of all, every story takes on its own truth.
Of course.
And that's not what happened. And it wasn't 1986. It was 1982. Porsche wanted to win both categories, which they were pretty sure they were going to win the overall with X and Bell in the 956.
Yep.
This is not 962, shorter wheelbase 962 with a 4-valve twin turbo engine, whereas in America we're in the 62, longer wheelbase with an air-cooled motor, single turbo, which ultimately we managed to hop up here with Ed Pink and Alvin Springer at Andile to make more horsepower than the factory 4-cam motor, because we had 3.2-liter motors. They have 2.4.
I know Alvin very well. He's been a part of racing for many, many years.
Alvin and I started together. What happened was this. Porsche was convinced that in order to race, you must qualify. BF Goodrich agreed to allow us to qualify on Dunlop tires without any ID on them. Because the truth is that there's a limit. You have to cut within a certain limit to make the show. You don't just go because you're in a class.
Correct.
As a matter of fact, my drivers, two of the guys that I raced with, Francois Mignot, who was a great guy, great driver, he didn't get enough in the time in the car and they didn't let him race, and he was French, which is just unheard of. They'd make some new rule or something and change that, but they didn't. And so they stick to their rules, and God bless them. And the poor guy was a great driver. He just never got enough time in the car, and they didn't let him start. So Doc Bundy had to do that race with me, and there was just two of us, and we did the whole race, which I was used to because at the Daytona 24-hour, we did 2 driver races leading up to nowadays when there's 6 drivers or whatever it is. I never quite understood that, why there's more drivers on the podium than mechanics.
It's how they get it paid for, Jim. Come on, you know the answer to that.
I didn't want to bring that up, but that's how it is.
By the way, I got to dial back to the fact that you guys came up with 20 grand and that was enough to go to Le Mans. That blows my mind. 20 grand wouldn't even pay the fuel bill at Le Mans.
There's a little sidebar to that. The Kramer brothers were going anyway.
Right.
They went every year, and they were a top lot flight team. They won overall the next year because they didn't have the Group 6 class. And I hooked them up with the guys who raced in that, the Whittington brothers, with basically the same car, which is now owned by Bruce Meyer, who's the founding director of the Peterson Museum, owns that car. And I hooked the Whittington brothers up with the Kramer brothers, and they won again, both in Group 5. We were Group 5 previous year, and they won overall because there was no Group 6 anymore. So anyway, BFGoodrich agreed to do that. We did qualify, and that car was so fast down the straight. I remember in qualifying that little 924 with this hot rod motor in it. I could catch a toe off Derek Bell in the 956, and he wouldn't get away from me. As soon as he went over the kink, down through the kink and over the hump and get on the brakes, he'd disappear.
Right.
We didn't have the downforce or the braking capability in our car waiting. Anyway, the factory set it up so I got a tow with the 924 from the 956 in qualifying, and we did well.
That's
and
awesome.
I would catch a tow from him occasionally during the race, and Doc did too. And it was Doc Bundy and I. Doc had never been to Le Mans. I'd been to Le Mans in 78, but I'd never been in a stock 924. Well, guess what? We had a lot of engine trouble leading up to the start of the race, and poor Francois Mignot didn't get into the car. And Doc and I are now starting this race alone. So the night before the race, we find out that the reason the engine isn't running well is something is wrong, and Porsche decides to rebuild the engine. Now, this will tell you why, if I ever go anywhere to a serious race, go with Porsche, because you got a real good chance of doing well. They always come back a lot. I say, what are we going to do, guys? And they say, we've got it figured out. So 2 guys show up. You've ever seen a Volkswagen flatbed truck where the sides fold down? It's a dual cab, like a Volkswagen bus, but with folding down rear sides into a flatbed truck. And they pull one of those things into the paddock. It's raining. Remember, this isn't the glorious pits that you have at Le Mans now. These are concrete bunkers with steel pipes full of gasoline running over the top. So I say, well, what are you going to do with that thing? They pull an engine stand off, stick it in this hole in the back of this truck, and pull the 924 motor out of the car, which is in trouble, and rebuild it in the rain. 2 Porsche mechanics in red jumpsuits like you'd see in the factory, water from the rain dripping off their noses onto parts, and they build the engine that we will run in the 24-hour race in the rain outside on the back of a truck. And what had happened is one of the gears on the crankshaft was incorrectly indexed.
Oh.
They took a flat file, for lack of a better term, was a flat bastard file, a new groove in it, and put the gear on the other way around, and off we went with a new motor. And we ran 24 hours with that motor, flat chat the entire time, and never missed a lick, except it pushed out a head gasket with about 3 laps to go. And Doc was in the car, and we called him in, and they would pack ice bags on top of the cylinder head and send him back out. And they did that for the last 3 laps. Every lap he pitted, we had a big lead over the Chevy Camaros.
Right.
And we could give up time. And by God, we ended up winning the race with ice steaming off the top of the cylinder heads on this Porsche. And it still goes down the straight as fast as it did in qualifying, and it still wins the race. Wow. So that is why you always want to go with Porsche. I used to kid Kirby and Hotchkiss. They always went to Le Mans because they love Le Mans. And one day I went up to them and I said, let me ask you guys, why you always come here in a Chevy Camaro? They don't have the reliability, don't seem to have the reliability that you'd want. It's a lot different than the GM of racing today. These were homemade guys with their Camaros and Corvettes. And their answer was really simple. We have dinner reservations.
On Saturday.
And on Saturday night,
the green flag flies at 4. We got dinner.
And we got this great place where we're staying, and they got dinner and everything else. So remember that part of the reason to go to Le Mans is the dinner and the hotels. And that's why they went. Eventually, I think they did finish in one, and we're quite disappointed they had to go to breakfast. But anyway, there's so many wonderful stories about this thing. And don't anybody get confused about Le Mans and all the other races in the world. There aren't any. This is it. This is the race in the place with the people. And that's why I'm so happy that I went there 3 times. And I'm so happy that I won as a driver twice and finished second or third the other time, but owned the team that time. That was the first time I'd ever gone as the team owner.
One of the things that's really interesting with this centennial edition of Le Mans this year, we're all so excited to go and be part of it because IMSA and the FIA, through the World Endurance Championship and the ACO, of course, have gotten together and worked really hard to hammer out a set of equivalency that creates a premier category that allows the Yankees to come over and race for the top honors. Of course, you and I both know there's a long history of politics at Le Mans. There's all the Group C era and there's all the stuff that happened. There's so many chapters that we can go through. So I'm interested in your perspective today. First of all, are you excited for Le Mans 2023? Is that on your radar screen? And then maybe if you want to dial that back and talk about politics, you were an American person with American co-drivers. You were with Kramer, which that's good. That gets you a check mark of Euro. That gives you entree. But how did that feel back then? And what's your observations on the politics between big old America and little France that wants to rule the roost?
There's a couple of different answers to that. First of all, I'm very excited, and I really want to see Hendrick's car do well in that Garage 54 or whatever it is.
66, yeah.
And Jeff Gordon's a friend and a wonderful guy. And Jimmy Johnson's going to go and the whole deal. And don't you count that car out. That's going to be a fast car. That's going to open a lot of eyes. That's a real state-of-the-art current NASCAR, which is really built by Dallara, I think, the chassis.
Yes. Yep.
So that's a serious company in Europe. That's not in North Carolina, which I don't mean to downgrade North Carolina, but they do stock car racing in North Carolina. Yeah. They race Dallaras there now, and they're fast. And the drivers are really, really good. There's no slouches in NASCAR.
I know Gianpaolo Dallara very well. Been there many times and worked with him on a lot of programs for sure. Right, and you're right. That's a pretty stout car. They made a lot of modifications too to get it to run 24 hours, but it's going to be stout.
They needed to also get downforce in the car, which is restricted by NASCAR.
Sure.
And downforce is going to be the key. And then you trim your downforce out to get qualifying speed, but you prefer it in the race, particularly if it begins to rain. So I'm very excited about that. And let's also remember that like anything on earth, there's almost no politics that can't be cured with a checkbook. and so I got to go to Le Mans with one, the Kramer brothers, and two, BFGoodrich, which is an enormous company that has great sway and dealers all over Europe. We'd enter in one country, we'd have the Italian dealers come. We'd go to France and have the French dealers come. We'd go to England and all the British dealers would come. So when we came up against some question that may turn out to be somewhat political, it tended to get solved at a different level than mine. So I was never really crushed by politics while I was going to Le Mans. And frankly speaking, no matter what you think about politics at Le Mans, they're racers. And ultimately, the politics go out the window for the love of the race.
Yep.
And they did it every time, and they've done it every time. And you show me a series that runs in America or anywhere else in the world that doesn't have political upheaval. We look at Formula One right now. It's almost a fist fight every race. It always gets cured when you light the motors up. It's like you say, have you ever been frightened? Sure, I guess so. But what stops it? When the engine starts. And you don't think about it anymore. Nothing happens. There's no politics. There's no nothing.
Then the focus comes. Have you had a chance to work with Jim France over the years? Have you gotten to know Jim at all?
I met him. I got to know Big Bill France.
Yeah, his dad.
And that's an experience. And I didn't realize the garages at Talladega closed at 5 o'clock at night and everybody got their lunch pail and went home. Right. I just thought it was like sports car racing in America. You pull the motor out at 6:30 and 3 in the morning, you put it back in the car and wake up in the morning groggy and go race. We decided not to go home when the garage people told us to go home. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting in Bill France's office staring at him. That was a very imposing man. It didn't take very long at all before I saw it exactly his way. And so I think that like we all deal with politics of different sorts. And let's face it, when you're going to Le Mans, you're going to a foreign country. It's their soil.
Yeah.
They call the shots.
Give us your thoughts on hypercars, this current generation of premier class at Le Mans. A couple of characteristics that I have noted and shared with the fans. I think it's really unique the way they take all the cars to the wind tunnel now to try to get them all in the same window for downforce. And they're using half shaft torque sensors to be able to measure the power output to try and get them equal. Maybe talk a little bit about hypercar, where that category is, and any of your thoughts on that.
When Tesla came out with the S model, I bought one. I still drive it today. 10 years and 80,000 miles on that car, and it's never missed a lick.
Wow.
The company, on the other hand, makes great spaceships, but their service is questionable in their automobile industry. And we're comparing it to companies that have been in business for 100 years. So the car is a wonderful car. I still drive it today. I love it. The flip side of that, my favorite car that I own is a 2015 Corvette front engine big V8. I love the feel of that car, and it's a great road car for me and my wife. I've had it all, and I've driven wonderful Porsches, and Porsches loaned me cars over the years when I was driving their cars. And I just think it comes down to a particular model of car from a particular manufacturer. So if you say the new rules are going to be predicated on dyno runs and torque shaft sensors and all that kind of stuff, so be it. Whoever gets that right is going to win. If you think you're going to even up the field by giving everybody the same drive shaft and all that, it never happens. Roger Penske always wins.
Even at Indy with all the same cars and the same engines,
Right.
Roger always wins, right?
Right. So I was asked one time, because the big question for an American racing car driver is, when are you going to go to Indy? Have you ever wanted to go to Indy? Sure. But I won at Riverside twice. Got a podium too. And I lived in Southern California. That's like a kid from Indy winning the 500,
right?
Because I lived in Southern California, and I had seen Phil Hill and Lance Reventlo's Scarab there when I was a teenager sitting in the grandstands with my father. So I was a fiend for that. And when I won there, it was bigger than a kid from Indy, for me, winning the 500. I was asked one time, so what do you think about this class or that class, or did you ever want to go to Indy, and so on and so forth? My answer was always the same. I never went to Indy because Roger Penske never called me. So that was the end of it. Have you ever sit on a porch in Ohio in the middle of summer with a bug zapper on the porch next to you?
Sure.
I think of Indy as zzz, zzz, just like a bug, because man, those concrete walls stop you really quick, and they hurt a lot of people. So if you're going to go there and hang around a bug zapper, you better be pretty sure you're not going in it.
Right.
And the best way to do that is to be in the best car. And I wouldn't go to Indy. I had some offers to go to Indy. I didn't want to go without Roger Penske, and he never called me, and I never went to Indy.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question is, if you're going to do an equivalency formula where you decide who's got this and who's got that, and you try to equal them up, it doesn't matter. Wayne Taylor and Roger Penske are always going to win.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what the equality formula is. It doesn't work that way. The best team wins. And that is the best part of motor racing. The best drivers and the best teams always win, because the best teams read the rule book and figure out the equivalencies and do it right. And the best drivers bring them back a lot.
So tell us about a few other of your co-drivers that you've worked with over the years. I started thinking about Roger Penske and some of the larger than life figures that you've been around. Certainly the Kramer brothers are very famous. In fact, we had Doc Bundy on this program. Vern Schuppan, Pete Halsmer, Jochen Mass. Any stories you want to share on some of your co-drivers?
You did your homework. I have had the benefit and the joy of driving with some of the best drivers in the world. My wife would say, well, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? I said, well, I think he'll make me look good, because that's all I ever thought about. I've been a teammate of Bob Wallach's.
Wow.
I've been a teammate of Derek Bell's. I've been a teammate of Rick Noobs. I never drove with Pete Halsmer, but he was on our team. So I never had a direct experience teaming up with him. But Jochen Mass is as good as they get. And when Jochen Mass and I drove together, I'm 6 feet tall with 7 foot legs. My wife, who's 5'1", in a theater, I'm shorter than she is. So with Mass and I, we were very quick, and we led a lot of races, even at the time, difficult BFGoodrich tires, and almost won a few, and should have won the Daytona 24-hour 3 times. I couldn't see over his steering wheel, and he couldn't reach my pedals. So there's more to it than, is he a great driver? Does he fit, or do you fit?
Right.
And so he would wear a pad taped to his back so he could reach
So you didn't have seat inserts you could slide in during a pit Good
I
stuff.
would take a piece of foam and sit on it so I could see over the steering wheel.
Right.
Because he's all body and no legs. So that was always difficult with me because of the length of my legs. And that came up with lots of different people. When I drove the historic Formula One cars for the last 8 or 9 years of my life, including at Ferrari, I had to cut the toes off my shoes and tape my toes in order to sit in the car.
Fit your feet down in the footwell, right?
And
Down
my
by the
feet
pedals.
were jammed up against the cowl, and they had to move the steering wheel back. With the paddle shift Ferraris and the Formula One cars, there's not a lot of room in there. And Schumacher was a couple of inches shorter than me, and we usually drove the same cars. So we kind of melded together in those cars. But with any other drivers, Luca Badois, who was a great test driver at Ferrari, was a different size than me. And so we struggled in the same cars. Eventually, what happened is I just did all my own testing at Fiorano when I was working with Ferrari. But with Porsche, remember that in the very first 956s and 62s at Le Mans, those were adjustable seats. Pull up a lever and slide it forward and back.
Yep.
That didn't help that I was so short in the body that I couldn't see over the steering wheel.
Right.
So we'd use a smaller steering wheel, which took more effort. Remember, this is pre-power steering. That was a little bit of a problem, is finishing a long race without arm fatigue. Rick Knoop and I had an interesting experience. They decided to race these big German sports cars, which are really fast, believe me, at Charlotte.
On the Roval?
On the Roval, pre-new Roval. This was old Roval. This was
Right.
a home Roval where the transition would just about bash your brains out if you went. And so Knoop and I go out at Charlotte in this 962, which is much, much faster around that oval than a NASCAR, that's for sure.
For sure.
I come in and I'm bashing my brains out. The top of a 956 or 62 door is plexiglass. It's not fiberglass. So I'm bashing the window out of this thing with my head because when I go up on the banking, the G-forces are so heavy, there's no possibility you can hold your head up. I don't care how long you worked out at the gym, it's not going to work. Knoop and I are talking, and we decide to go get surgical tubing in a hardware store in downtown Charlotte. And lo and behold, they've got it. And when we start that race, I'm starting the race, and I've got this surgical tubing tied to the side of my helmet down under my left arm. We're going backwards around this oval. And so my head, I'm leaning over in the car, like waiting for the rest to start, praying because I'm about to get a terrible cramp. As soon as the race started, your head would just go up straight. And we ran the whole race. I think we finished second there. And Knoop will remember that story because we both suffered from the same problem.
Once your neck muscles give up, you don't get them back. At that point, you're along for the ride.
Yeah, I can remember thinking of that. It's funny you brought that up because one Indy 500 that I remember, you remember Jerry Grant drove for Dan Gurney at the 500?
Mm-hmm.
Jerry was a great guy, and I knew him right up to the end. Great guy. Anyway, Jerry was not a guy who lived at the gym. To put it
It's a very gracious way of saying it, yes.
Right. But he was a hell of a good race driver, but he was an enormous guy. Big guy.
Right.
And he stuck out of an Indy Eagle like a foot. And his head was higher than the roll bar and so on. So at the end of the 500, Jerry Grant is leading the 500. He's going to win it. It's clear. He's in the fastest car and he's run the smartest race. And Gurney's put together a good program. I, at the time, was working at Gurney's, so I knew Jerry. I'm watching it on TV, and pretty soon he comes out of turn 4. His head might as well have been laying over on the fuel filler.
Right.
Poor guy was leaned over. He couldn't hold his head up anymore in the 500, and he's going to win. So at the last minute, he can't do it any longer. He pulls in, and they tug his head over and put the strap around and send him back out, and he finishes second.
Oh, my
so
goodness.
It cost him the race. And he, of course, argued that it should have been over on the previous lap and everything, but he lost.
Wow.
But that was where I got the idea, well, why don't we just pull our heads the other way with a rubber band? We didn't have a rubber band, but we did find surgical tubing, and we invented these things under our arm and attached to the side of the helmet and pulled us over. So as soon as you're up to speed, your head's up straight.
Perfect.
And it works perfectly.
That's
and now
great.
everybody's got those things. They've got Hans devices and all the stuff we never had. And even the Hans device now can be adjusted to give you stability too. And then the padding on the side of the cars. The later Ferraris that I drove, 2003, 4, 5, they had big padding. And if you got uncomfortable, you could lean up against it, but the vibration would hurt your eyesight, so you didn't want to do it often.
Great stuff. Do you have any one last story that you wanted to try to work in? We got to wrap this up. If you got one more that's tickling around in there, I know you mentioned you had a couple of real gems that you were going to hold out. I think those have probably come through, but anything else that comes to mind?
I'll tell you a little piece that's fascinating to me, and it's why Porsche wins Le Mans all the time when they decide to. Porsche is a hot rod company. I'm a hot rod guy. I grew up in Pasadena. I watched the guys come home on the GI Bill and take a 32 Ford and pull the fenders off and put a modified flat in it. I watched them take a Harley Davidson and strip the fenders off and turn it into a Triumph. It looked like it had a buddy seat on it and so on. And they'd lower them and do everything. I'm a hot rod guy. I still am today. I love 32 Fords. I got a 32 Ford that'll smoke most of these cars today. I love Porsche because think about it. If you go to Daytona this year or Le Mans this year, what will you see? You will see a 1963 Porsche 911 with fatter fenders and the engine turned around and a different engine which has more horsepower and the suspension lowered. It's still a 63 911 rear engine car that's been modified. It's a hot rod and I'm a hot rod guy and I love doing it. And look, the very first 962s we got had 625 horsepower. And so people didn't get killed when they'd hit things. They'd get hurt. We got banged up a bit. Pretty soon we killed people. We killed them at Le Mans. We killed them at Daytona. We killed them. Poor Manfred Winkelhock was killed at Motorsport. Why? Because the car was supposed to have 625 horsepower.
They turned it up to 900.
Well, we had two qualifying motors, one from Ed Pink and one from Alvin Springer at 910 horsepower on the dyno, and one that we turned up for qualifying at Daytona that had 1,000 horsepower. It was a hot rod motor. It had all
on an aluminum chassis, man. That's the recipe.
So what did we do? We here, if you could be here, you'd see 108. Eric has done the beautiful drawings of this car. 108 C2. What does C stand for? Chapman. Jimmy Chapman built chassis for Indy cars, and he was here in Orange County. When I folded the tub up over me at Miami and broke my shoulder and 2 ribs and had to be back the next week to race, we sent the car to Dave Clem up in Atlanta. He rebuilt the car, sent it back, but still a sheet metal chassis. And we've got all this horsepower. What I ended up doing is building a honeycomb tub, which we made Chapman tub numbers, and Porsche was so happy with it that if you look in the Porsche record of the 962s, you will see C's after certain ones. And those are our chassis we built right here in Laguna Beach. And raced them out of Laguna Beach.
Well, that is a perfect place to stop. It's so hard to stop because I know, Jim, we could go on and on. I am going to do my very best to come and visit you. I think we're left savoring those last bites, and just that notion of you as a racer and a hot rodder matches your Southern California history. It matches all the stories and it really ties it together. So I want to thank you for the extraordinary pleasure of spending this hour with you on behalf of all the fans that are here. I look forward to more people getting a chance to see this with the recording that David prepared and we get this laid down. It's quite a nice time, Jim. Thank you.
My pleasure, for sure.
This episode has been brought to you by the Automobile Club of the West and the ACO USA. From the awe-inspiring speed demons that have graced the track to the courageous drivers who have pushed the limits of endurance, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is an automotive spectacle like no other. For over a century, the 24 Hours Le Mans has urged manufacturers to innovate for the benefit of future motorists, and it's a celebration of the relentless pursuit of speed and excellence in the world of motorsports. To learn more about or to become a member of the ACO USA, look no further than www.lemans.org. Click on English in the upper right corner, and then click on the ACO Members tab for club offers. Once you've become a member, you can follow all the action on the Facebook group ACO USA Members Club and become part of the legend with future Evening with the Legend meetups. This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.